Hello Grand Archive players, let's answer a rules question. How do damage prevention and modification effects work? Let's look at this situation. Player A's champion attacks player B's champion using Blazing Charge. On the following turn, player B's champion attacks player A's champion using Rending Flames, using the class bonus effect. How much damage is dealt to player A's champion? How about if player A also has a forged scale mill? Effects that modify damage dealt are all replacement effects, which usually use some variation of if something would happen, something else happens instead. Replacement effects do not use the stack and cannot be responded to. They just directly modify whatever event they're looking for. In the case of everything in this video, all these replacement effects are modifying events where damage is dealt. So the question becomes, how do we handle multiple replacement effects? Before we proceed, let's take some time to consider some possibilities for how this kind of situation could be handled. One sensible solution is to take each effect based on when they began, like timestamps. There are pros and cons to this potential approach. It is pretty intuitive, but sometimes it's unclear or difficult to remember exactly when and in which order effects resolved, like if an effect began some time ago, or in a complicated stack where fast actions are resolving at different times. In our example, the Blazing Charge clearly happened before Rending Flames. But does the effect of Forged Scale Mill begin when it enters play, or when the banish trigger finishes resolving? Could you get a competitive advantage based on when in the turn you activated a damage prevention effect? What if we applied replacement effects in turn order, like with simultaneous triggers? That would apply all the effects from one player at once, followed by the effects of the other player. The result of damage would be heavily reliant on whose turn it was, and we'd still need to work out an order of effects from the same player. How would applying effects based on a set order a la layers? Then players would need to know what that order is, and have to categorize damage modification effects into each type. And on top of that, we would need some other method for effects of the same type. And I think that's enough philosophizing. It's time to unearth this lead. If there are multiple replacement effects trying to apply to the same event, they are ordered like this. The game evaluates for applicable effects. Then, the player who controls whatever is being affected, or owns if there is no controller, chooses one of those effects to apply, and that effect is applied. This effect continues to repeat for each applicable replacement effect, until there are none left to apply. Keep in mind that each applicable replacement effect must be used, and each effect applies a maximum of one time per event. Some people, including me, summarize this as the player just picks an order for all the replacement effects. And while this is a helpful shortcut, it isn't completely true, and we'll address that later. Now, this method isn't also without its cons, such as being somewhat unintuitive sometimes, and heavily favoring the player receiving the damage, but this is how it works. For now, let's finally return to our example. Player A's champion is receiving the damage, so player A has the choice of which of these replacement effects to apply first. If they apply Reckless Charges +1, the damage will be increased to 4. Then they have one more effect to apply, Rending Flames ×2, resulting in 8 total damage. Alternatively, they could apply Rending Flames, then Reckless Charge, resulting in 7 total damage. As you can see, the result of applying these effects can have different outcomes depending on player A's choices. Adding the Forged Scale Mill to the equation, player A has a variety of choices in what order to apply these 3 effects. The possibilities might start to seem overwhelming, but usually it boils down to, does this player want to minimize or maximize the damage? And it's simple to work out from there. If player A wants to minimize the damage taken, they'd apply the reduction from Scale Mill, then double, then add 1 for 3 damage total. If for whatever reason player A wants to maximize the damage, they'd add, double, then reduce. That is, the opposite order, resulting in 6 damage taken. And there are some options for damage values in between. Here's a list of possible outcomes depending on the ordering of the replacement effects. It's a lot to take in, but really the vast majority of the time people aren't interested in most of these outcomes. Players are usually only worried about taking the least damage possible, and only occasionally trying to take the most damage possible. You'll also notice that the order of adding and subtracting in sequence usually does not matter, due to the commutative property of arithmetic or something like that. However, sometimes it does matter, and you can't just do the math with all the operations at once. Let's look at a situation where this is the case. Let's say player A's champion is linked with a Vapor Jet shield. Player B activates the ability of Poison Dagger targeting player A's champion. Then they attack player A's champion with a 1 power ally, then a 2 power ally. Assuming player A wants to minimize damage taken, how much damage is dealt in this sequence? First, Poison Dagger attempts to deal 1 damage to player A's champion, which is prevented by the Vapor Jet shield's effect. Note that Poison Dagger's damage amplification effect is not contingent on the 1 damage being dealt, so that effect will apply until end of turn. Then, the first attacking ally attempts to deal 1 damage. It may be tempting to say that the +1 and -1 damage effects cancel each other out here. After all, a number +1 minus 1 equals that number, and a number -1 plus 1 also equals that number. However, this is a situation where the stepwise processing of replacement effects is important, and you can't just lump all the effects together at once. So there are two replacement effects that I want to apply to this damage event: the reduction from Vapor Jet Shield and the increase from Poison Dagger. If player A applies the +1 from the dagger first, the game sees that there is another applicable replacement effect from the shield to reduce the damage by 1, and the damage from this totals 1. If they apply the -1 from the shield first, we'll see something interesting. When the damage is reduced to 0, it's no longer considered to be a damage event. So when the game evaluates this event for any applicable replacement effects, it doesn't find any. Poison Dagger effect increases damage that would be dealt, but now damage wouldn't be dealt. This replacement effect is no longer applicable to this event. So player A may take 0 damage from this attack. This is what I meant when I said that it's not always accurate to say that the player chooses an order for replacement effects at the beginning and to analyze the situation that way. Next, the second attacking ally attempts to deal 2 damage. Unlike before, it doesn't matter which effect player A applies first here. The damage dealt will be increased then decreased by 1, or decreased then increased, for a total of 2 damage. Now let's talk about types of damage modification effects, each of which function a little bit differently. The first type is shielding or blocking type prevention, which will attempt to prevent damage, sometimes only of a certain type, up until it is depleted. Examples of this are Cleric Robes, Slime Shield, Deflecting Edge, and Safeguard Paragon. Look for the phrase prevent the next end damage that would be dealt, where n specifies the total amount of damage that the effect is trying to prevent. These effects usually last until end of turn and will persist, continuing to reduce damage whenever possible, up to that total depletion amount or until they expire. Note that some effects limit what kind of damage event they can apply to. For example, Deflecting Edge only applies to combat damage, and Safeguard Paragon only to non-combat damage. The second type is instance type prevention, which will attempt to prevent the next singular instance of damage. Examples of this are, confusingly, the various spell shields, as well as cards like Crystallized Destiny, and more exotic prevention effects like Perfect Repulsion, Water Barrier, Fortified Mana Shield, and Vainglory Retribution. One-time effects that amplify rather than prevent instances of damage function the same way, such as Prima Materia and Weaken Resistance. These effects generally use the phrase, the next time damage would be dealt, and apply only to the next damage event that they could apply to. Unlike other types of damage modification effects, they will not attempt to apply to any damage effects beyond that one time. Like before, some of these effects specify only certain kinds of damage events they will try to apply to. For example, Perfect Repulsion only applies to damage that equals X, and Vainglory Retribution only applies to combat damage that's 4 or less. The third type is persistent or multi-instance type protection, which will attempt to prevent any instance of damage they apply to for their duration. This actually works the same way as Type 2 instance prevention, with the difference that they can apply to multiple events rather than just one. Examples of this are cards like the familiar Safeguard Amulet and Resolute Stand, Vapor Jet Shield, Veiling Breeze, Flash Grenade, Clarent Reimagined, Pangtong Young Phoenix, and Ominous Shadow tokens. Again, there are also damage amplification effects that work the same way, such as Poison Dagger and Relentless Outburst. Let's look at an example to help illustrate how these damage prevention types work. Player A activates Slime Shield and Spell Shield Arcane before being hit for 4 damage. What happens? Or rather, what could happen? If player A applies Slime Shield first, it will attempt to prevent 3 out of the 4 damage. This completely depletes the Slime Shield. Then, player A applies Spell Shield Arcane to prevent the remaining 1 damage, getting 1 Enlightened counter. If player A applies Spell Shield Arcane first, it will prevent all 4 damage, giving the champion 4 Enlightened counters. The damage was entirely prevented and there are no more replacement effects to apply. Slime Shield will continue to be able to prevent the next 3 damage that would be dealt this turn. This is clearly a preferable outcome for player A. Let's do this example again, except this time with 3 damage being dealt. What are the possible outcomes here? If player A activates Slime Shield first, it will prevent all 3 damage, becoming depleted in the process. Spell Shield Arcane hasn't been applied, so it will stick around and apply to the next instance of damage this turn. If player A activates Spell Shield Arcane first, it will prevent all 3 damage. Slime Shield will continue to apply to the next 3 total damage that will be dealt this turn. Depending on what further damage player A expects to receive, it may be strategically relevant to choose one of those outcomes over the other. One of the most confusing aspects of damage prevention is how it interacts with unpreventable damage. Let's return one more time to the previous example, but player A's champion is being hit by 2 unpreventable damage. If player A applies Slime Shield first, the damage event will be unchanged, since it is unpreventable. However, Slime Shield will still be able to apply to any further damage this turn. Then, when Spell Shield Arcane applies to this damage event, it will also be unable to prevent this damage. Instance type prevention like this only gets applied once. Unlike with shielding type prevention, this instance type prevention will not be able to prevent any further damage this turn. It only gets to apply once, even if applying it didn't change the outcome in this case. Changing the order of applying the replacement effects doesn't matter in this particular example, and the end result is that the champion takes 2 damage, Slime Shield is intact, and Spell Shield is broken. A couple of final notes about damage modification effects. Be sure to read the text carefully. Despite their similarities, Bubble Mage is a replacement effect, while Halocline Scout is not. Effects such as Explosive Rune might use the word instead, suggesting that they might be replacement effects, but they don't modify damage dealt. It just specifies what the effect is trying to do in the first place, rather than modifying an event. Also, some older cards unfortunately have wording that might suggest that they aren't replacement effects, but have errata to bring them in line with more consistent templating. Lastly, note that damage amplification effects do not add their own instances of damage. Since they modify the existing damage event, that damage has whatever types and characteristics it originally had. So, for example, if Bubble Mage increases the damage from a Sparkle Light, that additional damage isn't from Bubble Mage. That source is still Sparkle Light. All that damage is still Fire Element, it's still non-combat damage, and it's still unpreventable. That's all for this video. Thanks for watching.